Stay away from my son." The words cut through the vast living room, sharp and controlled, but they came a second too late because Alina was already kneeling on the polished floor, her hand gently wrapped around the small, trembling fingers of the boy in front of her. The chandelier above cast a soft golden light that reflected across the marble, and in that stillness, everything felt suspended, like even the air was waiting to see what would happen next. Lucas Harrington sat curled near the edge of the oversized couch, his breathing uneven, shoulders tight, eyes unfocused as if the world around him was too loud, too bright, too much. He didn't look at his father, didn't respond to the quiet commands or the careful distance that had always defined their interactions, but when his fingers found Alina's hand, he held on, not tightly, not desperately, but with a quiet certainty that stopped her from pulling away. Alina Brooks had only been in this house for 3 days, just another temporary hire in a place where everything felt too big, too expensive, too cold, where voices echoed and footsteps softened against rugs that cost more than her yearly rent. But she had seen that look before, years ago, in a smaller room with cracked walls and a flickering ceiling light, where her own child used to sit the same way, silent and overwhelmed, needing something no one else seemed to understand. She didn't speak now, didn't ask permission, didn't explain. She just stayed, her palm open, warm, steady, letting Lucas decide how close he wanted to be. Across the room, Daniel Harrington stood still, his tailored suit perfect, his posture rigid, a man used to control, to order, to solutions that could be calculated and executed. But none of that worked here, not with his son, not in moments like this when everything slipped through his hands no matter how tightly he tried to hold it together. "I said step away," he repeated, quieter this time, but something in his voice had shifted, not anger, not yet confusion, just the faint crack of uncertainty. Alina didn't look at him, her focus never leaving the boy whose breathing was slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to change, each inhale less sharp than the last, each exhale a fraction longer. Outside, beyond the tall glass windows, the late afternoon sky stretched wide and pale, clouds drifting slowly as a soft wind brushed against the trees lining the property, their leaves whispering in a rhythm that seemed to echo inside the room. Lucas shifted closer, his forehead brushing lightly against the back of her hand, and for a brief second, his fingers tightened, then relaxed, as if testing whether she would pull away like everyone else always did. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. She simply stayed. And in that fragile, quiet moment, something changed, something so small it could have been missed if anyone had blinked. Because for the first time since Alina had stepped into this house, the boy was not pulling away from the world, he was reaching into it. And Daniel Harrington, standing just 10 feet away, felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Something he couldn't name, something he wasn't prepared to face, as he watched his son choose the presence of a stranger over everything he had ever tried to give him. Alina could feel the shift before anyone else did, not in the room, but in the small changes inside the boy's grip, the way Lucas no longer clutched her hand like he was holding on to something slipping away, but instead rested his fingers there, lighter now, steadier, as if he had finally found something that did not demand anything from him. She kept her breathing slow, matching the quiet rhythm of his, remembering nights years ago when she would sit on a worn carpet with her own child, counting each breath like it was a fragile thread keeping the moment from unraveling. The house around them remained silent, too silent for a place this large, where every object seemed designed to impress, but nothing felt lived in, not really, not in the way that held warmth. Daniel Harrington took a step closer, then stopped, the soft sound of his shoe against the marble louder than it should have been, his gaze fixed on the connection unfolding in front of him, trying to understand it, trying to measure it the same way he measured everything else in his life, but there was no clear logic. Here, no transaction, no explanation that fit into the structured world he had built. "He does not like strangers," Daniel said finally, his voice quieter now, almost as if speaking too loudly might break whatever fragile calm had settled over his son. But Lucas did not react to the statement, did not pull away, did not retreat into the distant silence that had become so familiar. Instead, he leaned a fraction closer to Alina, his shoulder brushing against her arm, a small movement that carried more meaning than anything Daniel had seen in months. Alina nodded slightly. Though she did not look up, her attention still anchored to the boy, her voice low and even when she spoke. He just needs to know he is safe. And the words were simple, almost too simple, but they carried the weight of something lived, something earned through moments that had not been easy, moments that had left marks no one else could see. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in resistance, as if part of him wanted to reject the idea that something so small could matter more than everything he had tried. The specialists, the routines, the carefully designed environments meant to reduce triggers and control outcomes. All the things that had been recommended and implemented with precision, yet none of them had led to this. None of them had brought his son to a place where he would willingly stay still, willingly reach out. The light in the room shifted as a cloud passed over the sun, softening the brightness that had filled the space, and for a moment, the edges of everything seemed less sharp, less defined, like the house itself was exhaling. Lucas's breathing continued to slow, his head tilting slightly until it rested gently against Alina's arm, his eyes no longer darting, no longer searching for something to push away, but settling into a quiet focus that had been absent before. Daniel watched it happen in real time. The change undeniable now, and something inside him loosened. Something he had held tight for longer than he could remember, though he would not have been able to name it even if he tried. "What are you doing?" he asked, not as a command this time, but as a question, genuine and uncertain, and Alina hesitated for just a second, as if choosing her words carefully, before answering in the same calm tone. "Nothing special," she said softly, "just staying." And the simplicity of it hung in the air, unadorned, unpolished, but impossible to ignore, as Daniel stood there. A man who had spent his life believing that everything important required strategy, effort, and control. Now watching his son find peace in something that asked for none of those things. Only presence, only patience, only a kind of understanding that could not be bought or instructed, only given. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, slowly, like a room learning how to breathe again. And Daniel could hear it now, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something softer, something unfamiliar, the faint rhythm of his son's steady breathing filling a space that used to echo with tension. He took another step forward, careful this time, measured, as if the ground itself might crack beneath him if he moved too quickly. And when he stopped just a few feet away, he saw it. Clearly, Lucas's face no longer tight, no longer pulled inward, but relaxed in a way Daniel had not seen since before everything changed, before loss had turned their home into something quiet and distant. Alina remained exactly where she was, her posture calm, her shoulders relaxed, her hands still open beneath the small weight of the boy's fingers. And though she had said she was doing nothing, Daniel could not ignore what he was witnessing, because nothing had never looked like this before. "He usually does not stay like that," Daniel said, his voice lower now, almost uncertain, as if speaking too directly might disrupt the fragile moment. And Alina finally lifted her eyes, meeting his gaze just briefly, not challenging, not defensive, just present. "Sometimes they just need someone who does not expect anything from them," she replied softly, and the words settled in the space between them, simple but heavy. Carrying a truth that did not need to be explained, Daniel's mind moved quickly, searching for logic, for a reason he could hold on to, something he could define and repeat. But every explanation he reached for felt incomplete, because none of it accounted for the way Lucas had chosen this moment, this person, without instruction, without prompting, without any of the systems Daniel had relied on. The air shifted again as the faint sound of a clock ticking somewhere down the hall became noticeable, each second passing slower than it should, stretching the moment into something almost suspended in time. And Daniel realized he was holding his own breath, waiting, watching, as if any movement might undo what was happening. Lucas adjusted slightly, his head now resting more fully against Alina's arm, his body no longer tense but settled, grounded. And there was something about that small movement that made Daniel's chest tighten, not with fear, but with recognition, because he remembered a time when his son used to lean into him that same way, before distance had replaced closeness, before silence had replaced connection. "Why you?" Daniel asked, quietly, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Not accusing, not defensive, just honest. And for a moment, Alina did not answer, her gaze drifting down to the boy beside her, her expression softening in a way that carried both warmth and something deeper, something that had been shaped by loss. "Because I see him," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. And the simplicity of it struck harder than anything else could have, because Daniel realized, standing there in a house filled with everything he had built, that seeing his son had somehow become the one thing he no longer knew how to do. The light shifted again, the sun breaking through the clouds outside and spilling into the room in a warm, quiet glow that settled across the floor, across the couch, across the small space where Lucas sat peacefully for the first time in what felt like years, and Daniel stood there, unmoving, caught between the world he understood and the one unfolding in front of him. A world where control did not matter, where solutions were not designed, but felt, where a single quiet presence could do what everything else had failed to do. And in that moment, without fully realizing it, something inside him began to change. Daniel did not realize he had moved until he was standing close enough to see the fine details he had never noticed before. The faint crease near Lucas's brow now smoothed, the small rise and fall of his chest steady and calm, the way his fingers rested loosely in Alina's hand without tension or fear, and something about that image made the room feel smaller, quieter, as if all the distance that had once filled it was slowly being pulled away. He glanced toward the wide hallway where a member of the staff stood frozen near the corner, uncertain whether to step in or disappear, and for the first time, Daniel raised a hand slightly, not in command but in quiet instruction, signaling them to stay back, to not interrupt, because whatever was happening here felt too fragile to risk breaking. The air carried a faint scent of polished wood and fresh linen, the kind of controlled perfection that had always defined this house. But now it felt different, less important, almost irrelevant, compared to the quiet connection unfolding just a few feet away. Lucas shifted again, not pulling away, not retreating, but leaning further into the stillness, his head now resting more comfortably, his body no longer guarded, and Daniel felt a tightening in his chest that he could not ignore, because it was not fear, not frustration, but something closer to recognition, something he had not allowed himself to feel in a long time. "He used to do that," Daniel said quietly, almost to himself, his voice carrying a memory he had not spoken aloud in years before. And the sentence did not finish, it did not need to, because the weight of what followed hung in the silence between them. Alina did not ask, did not press. She simply listened, her presence steady in the same way it had been since she first knelt beside the boy. And after a moment, she spoke, her tone gentle. "They do not forget how to feel safe. They just forget who it is safe with." And Daniel's eyes shifted slightly, the words settling deeper than he expected, because they did not accuse, they did not challenge, they simply existed as truth. Outside, the wind picked up just enough to brush the tall windows with a soft whisper, and the shifting light painted slow patterns across the floor, across the furniture, across the quiet space where everything important was happening without sound. Daniel exhaled slowly, a breath he had been holding longer than he realized, and lowered himself into the nearby chair, not out of exhaustion, but because standing suddenly felt like too much, like he was witnessing something that required him to be still, to observe, to understand without interfering. "Every specialist said structure was the answer," he said after a moment, his voice softer now, less certain. "Routine, control, distance when needed." And he let out a faint, almost humorless breath. None of them said to just sit on the floor and wait. And Alina's lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but into something warmer, something understanding. "Sometimes the answer is not what we are taught. It is what we are willing to feel," she replied, and the words lingered, quiet but undeniable. Lucas's hand shifted once more, his fingers loosening completely now as sleep began to settle in, his body leaning fully into the calm that had finally found him. And Daniel watched it happen, watched his son surrender to rest without resistance, without fear, without the invisible barrier that had stood between them for so long. And in that moment, the house did not feel cold anymore. It did not feel distant. It felt still, grounded, as if something essential had returned. something he had been searching for without knowing where to look. And as Daniel sat there, his gaze fixed on the quiet scene before him, he understood, perhaps for the first time, that what his son needed had never been out of reach. It had simply been something he did not know how to give until now. The room held its breath as Lucas drifted deeper into sleep, his small frame finally at ease, his fingers no longer gripping but resting, as if he trusted the moment enough to let go. And Alina stayed exactly where she was, not shifting, not adjusting, even as the weight of time pressed gently against her shoulders, because she understood that sometimes the smallest movement could break something fragile. Daniel watched from the chair, his hands loosely clasped, his posture no longer rigid but uncertain, like a man standing at the edge of something he could not yet define, and his eyes did not leave his son, not even for a second, because what he was seeing felt too important to miss. The quiet stretched, not empty but full, filled with the soft rhythm of breathing, the faint hum of the house settling around them, the distant ticking of a clock marking seconds that no longer felt rushed. And in that stillness, Daniel's thoughts began to shift, not in sharp realizations, but in slow, uncomfortable questions that he had avoided for years. He remembered the first time Lucas stopped responding to him, the way he had stood in the doorway calling his name, expecting the same bright reaction, the same small steps running toward him, but instead receiving silence, distance, confusion, and he had responded the only way he knew how, by trying to fix it, by bringing in experts, by following instructions, by building systems that promised progress but never delivered connection. His gaze lowered briefly to his own hands, as if searching for something there, some answer he might have missed, and when he looked up again, the contrast was impossible to ignore, because everything he had tried required effort, control, precision, and yet what he was witnessing now required none of those things, only presence, only patience, only a kind of quiet understanding that could not be forced. "Does he always fall asleep like this?" Daniel asked softly, his voice careful, almost hesitant, and Alina shook her head slightly, her eyes still on Lucas. "No," she answered. "He is letting himself rest because he feels safe." And the word safe lingered, heavier than any technical explanation, heavier than any diagnosis, because it pointed to something Daniel could not measure, something he had not known how to provide. A faint shift in Lucas's breathing signaled that he had fully surrendered to sleep, his body now completely relaxed against Alina's arm, and she adjusted just enough to support him without waking him, her movements slow and practiced, guided by memory more than thought, and Daniel noticed that too, the quiet confidence in her actions, the absence of hesitation, as if she had lived this moment before in a different place, under different circumstances. "You have done this before," he said, not as a question but as an observation, and this time, Alina paused, her gaze lowering slightly, her expression softening with something deeper, something that carried both warmth and loss. "Yes," she said quietly, and for a moment, it seemed like she might say more, but the silence returned instead, holding the unspoken words between them. Daniel did not press, not because he was not curious, but because something in him understood that some truths did not need to be explained to be felt. And as he sat there, watching his son sleep peacefully for the first time in so long, he felt a weight settle in his chest, not heavy, not suffocating, but grounding, like a realization slowly taking shape, that everything he had built, everything he had relied on, had missed something essential, something simple, something human, and now, in the quiet presence of a woman who asked for nothing and expected nothing, his son had found it, and Daniel could no longer pretend that he did not see it. Time slowed in a way Daniel had never experienced before, not the kind measured by schedules or deadlines, but something deeper, something that stretched quietly between each breath Lucas took as he slept against Alina's arm, and for once, Daniel did not feel the need to interrupt it, to fix it, or to move it forward. He simply watched, his gaze softening in a way that felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, as if he were stepping into a version of himself he had long avoided. The late afternoon light shifted again, warmer now, spilling through the tall windows and settling across the floor in long, golden lines that reached toward where they sat, and the entire room seemed to glow with a quiet stillness that made even the smallest movement feel significant. Alina adjusted her posture slightly, careful and deliberate, supporting Lucas without waking him, her hands still open beneath his. Her presence steady as if time itself had taught her how to wait without impatience. Daniel noticed the details now, the way she did not rush, did not check the time, did not seem concerned with anything beyond the moment in front of her, and it unsettled him in a way he could not explain, because his entire life had been built on urgency, on decisions that moved quickly, on actions that produced results. And yet here, none of that applied. "How long can you stay like that?" he asked quietly, his voice no longer carrying authority, but something closer to curiosity, and Alina's answer came without hesitation. "As long as he needs," she said softly, and the simplicity of it landed with more weight than any strategy ever had. Daniel leaned back slightly in the chair, his eyes still fixed on his son, and a memory surfaced, not forced, not searched for, but rising on its own, a moment from years ago when Lucas had fallen asleep on his shoulder during a long drive home, his small hand curled against Daniel's chest, trusting, unguarded, and Daniel had sat there in the driveway, long after the engine had turned off, not wanting to move, not wanting to break the quiet peace of it. He had forgotten that feeling, or maybe he had buried it beneath everything that came after, the confusion, the distance, the quiet frustration of not knowing how to reach his own child. "I used to think I had to teach him how to exist in this world," Daniel said after a moment, his voice lower now, almost reflective. "But maybe I never learned how to meet him where he is." And the admission hung in the air, not dramatic, not loud, but real in a way that could not be ignored. Alina glanced at him briefly, her expression gentle but steady, and for a second, there was something unspoken between them, not agreement, not correction, but understanding, the kind that did not require explanation. Outside, the wind softened, the trees settling into a calm stillness that mirrored the room, and the faint ticking of the clock seemed to fade into the background, no longer marking time as something to be managed, but simply something that existed. Lucas stirred slightly, not waking, just shifting deeper into rest, his breathing even and slow, and Daniel felt something inside him loosen further, a quiet release he had not realized he needed. He looked at Alina again, really looked this time, not as an employee, not as someone beneath his world, but as a person who had stepped into a moment he had failed to navigate and changed it without force, without instruction, without expectation. "What happens when he wakes up?" Daniel asked, the question carrying a hint of concern, as if the calm might not last, as if it might slip away the moment reality returned. And Alina's answer came just as softly as before. "Then we stay again," she said, and Daniel nodded slowly, not fully understanding yet, but no longer resisting, as the quiet truth of it settled into him. That maybe this was not about fixing anything at all, maybe it was about learning to stay. The quiet did not feel fragile anymore. It felt earned, like something that had settled into place after a long time of being unsettled, and Daniel sat there watching it, not trying to understand it all at once, but allowing it to unfold in front of him piece by piece. Lucas remained asleep, his breathing steady, his small hand still resting in Alina's, and there was a softness in his face that Daniel had not seen in years, a kind of peace that made the room feel warmer, less distant, less like a space designed for appearances and more like a place where something real could exist. Daniel's gaze shifted slowly from his son to Alina, and for the first time, he noticed the details he had overlooked before, the quiet strength in the way she held herself, the patience in her stillness, the absence of any need to prove or explain, and it struck him that she had stepped into a situation that had defeated everyone else, not with expertise or authority, but with something far more difficult to define. "You said you have done this before," Daniel said quietly, his voice carrying less distance now, less formality, and more genuine curiosity. And Alina hesitated for a moment, her eyes lowering slightly, as if she were choosing how much to reveal, before she answered in a tone that remained calm, but carried a depth that had not been there before. "My son," she said softly, and the words alone were enough to shift something in the room. Daniel did not interrupt, did not ask right away, because something in her voice told him this was not just information, it was memory, and memory required space. He used to get overwhelmed, She continued after a moment, her hand still steady beneath Lucas's. The noise, the lights, everything felt too much for him, and people would try to fix it, to quiet him, to change him. But what he needed was someone to sit with him until the world felt smaller again, and Daniel felt a slow tightening in his chest as the words settled in, because they mirrored everything he had been trying to do, and everything he had been getting wrong. And now, Daniel asked carefully, the question forming without him fully realizing it. And Alina's expression softened further, a quiet sadness passing through her eyes that did not break her calm. He passed away, she said gently, and the simplicity of it carried more weight than any explanation could have. The room did not react. There was no dramatic shift, no sudden change, just a deeper silence, one that held both loss and understanding at the same time. Daniel looked back at Lucas, his son resting peacefully, and for a moment, the connection became undeniable, not just between the boy and the woman beside him, but between two experiences that had shaped them both in different ways. "I am sorry," Daniel said, and the words came without hesitation, without the guarded tone he usually carried, because in that moment, there was no need for distance, no need for control, just acknowledgement. Alina nodded slightly, not dismissing it, not expanding on it, simply accepting it as part of the moment, and then her gaze returned to Lucas, her focus unwavering. Daniel leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, his posture no longer defensive, no longer rigid, but open in a way that felt unfamiliar. And he realized that what he had been witnessing was not just a moment of calm, it was a reflection of something deeper, something he had not understood before. That connection was not built through effort alone, but through presence, through the willingness to stay even when there was nothing to fix. Lucas stirred again, a small movement that drew both of their attention, his fingers tightening just slightly as if he were anchoring himself to the calm he had found, and Alina adjusted her hand without breaking contact. Her movements instinctive, practiced, guided by something Daniel now recognized as experience shaped by love and loss. And as Daniel watched this quiet exchange unfold, something inside him shifted fully, not just a question, not just a realization, but a turning point, because for the first time, he understood that what his son needed was not beyond him. It was something he had simply never learned how to give, and now, standing at the edge of that understanding, he knew he could not go back to the way things had been before. Daniel did not speak right away, because the weight of what he had just heard did not leave room for quick responses. It settled slowly, filling the space between thought and feeling, and for the first time in a long time, he did not try to push past it. Instead, he stayed with it, just like she had stayed with Lucas, and the realization did not come as a sudden breakthrough, but as a quiet understanding that unfolded piece by piece. He looked at Alina again, really looked, not through the lens of status or role, but as someone who had carried something he could now begin to recognize, a kind of patience shaped by loss, a strength that did not demand attention but revealed itself in moments like this. "You stayed with him," Daniel said softly, not as a question, but as a realization, and Alina nodded slightly, her gaze still resting on Lucas. "Until he did not feel alone anymore," she replied. And the simplicity of her words struck deeper than anything else, because Daniel understood. Now that this was not about techniques or instructions, it was about presence, about choosing not to leave when things became difficult or uncertain. The light in the room had softened into early evening tones, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor, but the warmth remained, holding the space together in a quiet balance that felt almost sacred. Lucas stirred gently, his fingers tightening for a brief second as if checking that the connection was still there. And when he felt it, when he found her hand exactly where it had been, his body relaxed again, sinking deeper into sleep, and Daniel watched that small moment with a focus he had never given anything before, because it revealed something he had missed for too long. That trust was not built in grand gestures, but in consistency, in being there again and again without pulling away. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on his knees, his posture no longer guarded, no longer distant, and when he spoke again, his voice carried something new, something quieter. "I thought giving him everything would be enough," he said, his eyes still on Lucas. "But I never gave him this," and he did not need to define what this was, because it was right in front of him, undeniable and clear. Alina did not respond immediately, not because she disagreed, but because she understood that this was something he needed to reach on his own. And after a moment, she said softly, "You can still give it." And the words did not come as comfort. They came as truth, steady and unembellished, offering possibility without pressure. Daniel exhaled slowly, a breath that seemed to carry years of quiet frustration and unspoken guilt. And for the first time, it did not feel overwhelming. It felt like something he could face, something he could begin to change. He shifted slightly in his seat, his gaze moving between his son and the woman beside him. And there was a clarity now that had not been there before, a recognition that what had happened in this room was not accidental. It was a lesson, one he had not expected but could not ignore. "Will you stay?" Daniel asked. And the question was simple, but it held everything, not just about this moment, but about what came next, about whether he was ready to learn something entirely different from the life he had built. Alina looked up at him, meeting his eyes fully this time, and there was no hesitation in her expression, only a quiet steadiness. "If he needs me," she said, and Daniel nodded, understanding that this was not about him, not entirely. It was about Lucas, about what Lucas needed, and for the first time, that felt right. The room settled again into silence, but it was no longer uncertain. It was grounded, held together by something real. And as Daniel sat there watching his son rest peacefully, his hand still connected to Alina's, he realized that this moment was not an ending. It was a beginning, not loud or dramatic, but quiet and certain, the kind that changed everything without needing to announce itself. The house did not feel the same anymore, not because anything had changed on the surface. The marble floors were still polished, the furniture still perfectly arranged. The walls still carried the quiet echo of a place built on precision. But something deeper had shifted, something that could not be measured or designed. And Daniel felt it as he sat there, no longer distant from the moment, no longer observing from the outside, but present in a way he had not allowed himself to be for years. Lucas slept peacefully beside Alina, his breathing steady, his small hand still resting in hers, as if the connection itself had become part of his rest. And Daniel watched it without interruption, without the urge to step in, because he understood now that not every moment needed his control, some only needed his willingness to stay. The evening light had softened into a quiet glow, stretching long across the room and settling gently around them. And in that calm, Daniel slowly stood, his movements careful, not wanting to disturb the stillness that had taken so long to arrive. He walked a few steps closer, stopping just beside them, close enough to see the fine details of his son's face, the relaxed expression, the absence of tension, the quiet trust that had returned without announcement. And something inside him tightened, not with fear, but with emotion he had kept buried beneath years of effort and frustration. He lowered himself slowly to the floor, not out of necessity, but out of choice, mirroring what he had seen, placing himself at the same level, removing the distance he had unknowingly maintained. And for a moment, he hesitated, his hand hovering slightly before he let it rest gently on the edge of the couch near Lucas. Not touching, not forcing, just present. Nothing dramatic happened, no sudden reaction, no shift that demanded attention, but Lucas's breathing remained steady, unchanged, and Daniel felt a quiet reassurance settle over him, that this was enough, that being here without expectation was not a failure, it was a beginning. Alina glanced at him briefly, her expression calm, understanding passing silently between them, and she did not speak. Because there was nothing that needed to be said, the moment spoke for itself. Outside, the wind had faded completely, leaving the world beyond the windows still and quiet, as if reflecting the calm that had finally taken hold inside. Daniel remained there, not counting time, not thinking ahead, just staying, allowing the silence to exist without filling it, allowing the connection to form in its own way. And as the minutes passed, something settled deeper within him, something steady and clear, that he did not need to have all the answers. He did not need to fix everything at once. He only needed to begin here. Lucas stirred slightly, his fingers shifting just enough to brush against Daniel's hand. A small, unconscious movement, but Daniel felt it fully, like a quiet signal, and he did not pull away. He did not react. He simply stayed, letting that brief contact exist without turning it into something more, without placing pressure on it. And in that stillness, something passed between them, not spoken, not defined, but real. The room held that moment gently, without interruption, without urgency, and as Daniel sat there beside his son and the woman who had shown him what he had been missing all along, he understood that this was what it meant to begin again, not with control, not with certainty, but with presence, with patience, with the quiet strength to remain, and in the soft glow of the fading light, with nothing but steady breathing and the warmth of two hands resting close together. The house finally felt like a place where something could grow, not perfectly, not instantly, but honestly, one quiet moment at a time.